up in the Goodland area, 72 at Garden City, 70 reported by Dodge City and Liberal, 72 over by the good folks of
Just finished up a run, and it was kind of a frustrating one because I haven't run in about 7 days, and I was shocked at how far I'd kind of stagnated in just that time. And I realized I had sort of quickly come to take for granted how far I'd come, and I wasn't really appreciating the work that I had to put in to actually get there in the first place.
And in the Ponca City Blackwell area, 68 degrees today.
This is a problem I see in a lot of poker players, and that I struggle with too, and I used to struggle with even more. Sort of thinking that the game owes you anything. The game doesn't owe you anything. I see this manifest a lot in Entitlement tilt, where somebody, is playing against somebody they perceive to be a weaker opponent. So the thing that's interesting about this is that it's a problem that you don't think about plaguing quite bad players very often, like very weak recreational players. But the idea that you're owed something, that you are entitled to win, that's not ever true. The game owes you nothing. The game owes me nothing. I guess just being able to have that thought process is a big part of what helps me with not being dragged down by it. I can go on this whole rant and still have that thought process. I can still.
Wide band of fairly heavy snow. Now, what will happen each time that you see the frontal system on there? That begins at 6 o'clock.
So in terms of combating it, awareness is part of it, because understanding it off the table really intimately is what can help you recognize it in game and think to yourself, now wait a minute, I'm not entitled to I'm not entitled to the pot, I'm not entitled to beating this particular player, I'm not entitled to winning this tournament, I'm not entitled to moving up in stakes. Everything in poker is earned, and I'm not there yet. I don't know if there's ever a there when it comes to poker, but I'm definitely not there yet. Creepiest bathroom ever. He's like blending in.
Yourself behind it, and a few pockets of low pressure, and fairly heavy band of rain showers and snow.
What'd you think of Paper Moon Diner?
Food was good.
Food's good.
Atmosphere was kind of weird.
Atmosphere was a little weird. It was a little creepy. You didn't even see the bathroom.
Yeah, on purpose.
All right, so I don't think I've even mentioned this yet, but we're moving apartments a couple towns over.
Right now.
Right? No, not right now, but we're looking at apartments today. Yeah, we saw a good one today, so we're gonna have to check out a couple more, but the bar was set pretty high, so we'll have to see. Home game tonight. I think that I'm gonna be able to get some whole card footage tonight. So let's get over there. Let's get to it. But first, gonna have to clear off my car.
72 over by the good folks of
So I actually did play a session in between the prior one and this one. It was a 2-5 session in Maryland Live. I didn't think the decisions were all that interesting. Most of the hands I made second best was value betting and lost, and a couple hands I just played kind of bad. Ultimately, I was in that game for about 1,200 and out for all of it, unfortunately. So rather than relive that experience, I figured I would just give you the update and take you back to the home game again. Now, this home game is pretty interesting because there is a wide distribution of player types. and I would say that I'm probably one of the more action players, but when certain people are not there, I sort of become the action. This is one of those kinds of nights, so buckle in and won't always have good hands. Let's just start it off with a hand like that. In this hand, there's a couple of limps. I am in the cutoff with 7-4 of clubs, and I bump it up to 20. I can hear the pre-flop police sirens behind me already. The button calls, and the big blind, who is a solid regular, bumps it up to 50. He doesn't always have to have a value hand here, and I actually think he might be pretty wide when he sees me isolating, so I decide to make the call, and the button calls too. The flop comes 8-3-3 rainbow, objectively pretty bad for us, but the big blind now checks. The button's still behind us, but this board shouldn't connect with anyone too hard. I do have pretty much the stone bottom of my range with just a couple of backdoors out there, so I decide to bet. I bet 100, which I want to look like I'm committed in terms of the other people's stacks. The big blind has about 160 when we come to this flop, which is probably a reason to just fold pre-flop, by the way, since we're going to a flop with basically SPR of 1.5 if I'm the only caller, SPR of 1 if the button calls 2, but that's neither here nor there. I decided to bet 100, button folds, and the big blind unfortunately goes all in. Now I'm in a very weird spot where I actually don't think he needs to have anything. It's certainly possible that he could play something like 10s plus this way, but I think especially with the weaker overpairs, he's more likely to bet small and just try to prevent cards from coming off. On larger overpairs like kings and aces, maybe queens, he could consider just checking here and check jamming, because I'm pretty much committed when I do bet. As it is though, I think he might just put me on a whole lot of garbage, which is basically what I have. If that's the case, I actually have 6 live cards, 6 live outs. Any 7, any 4 are good. There are a couple of backdoors I can hit. There's a couple of chop things I can hit. So ultimately, I do make the call. There's certainly some value in just being able to turn this hand over at showdown as well and say, look, I had 7-4 clubs and I got it in with 7 high. So I call. The turn is an 8, and the river, I have to call for it.
It'd be ugly if I win.
Once or twice. Okay, one time.
8. Put an 8 out there.
Wow.
He called it
Is
out.
that a chop?
Like, I request you, and it's like, okay.
Is that a chop? Wow. So you knew it was a head. Pull your money back.
He was 7-4.
Pull your money back. Pull your money back.
Re-raised the 50 with Queen 10.
And you know what's so sad? I was
Wow.
sitting there thinking to myself, I got a better hand than both of y'all.
And you did.
And I did. I had ace jack.
So,
I
that's
knew
what
I had
I'm
a better
saying
hand.
about
than
thinking on different levels.
I was worried. I was worried that you had like pocket 9s or 10s or something like that. And I was
Wow.
I needed to hit.
Yeah, this is some good stuff.
But it's another 8. And as I was sort of speculating, he has just 2 overs with the queen 10 of spades. There's a boat on the board, so we're going to chop it up. It's nice to run good, I guess. In this hand, the same opponent from the previous hand is on the button in a button straddle pot. There are a few limps, and I make it 25 with king 8 of clubs. I don't really like my sizing here. I think I need to go bigger if I'm going to take this kind of hand. I'm mostly trying to win it pre-flop, and the sizing is just not going to get it done. The button calls, and we actually just go heads up to a flop though. Flop is not bad, it's definitely above average. 6 deuce deuce with 2 clubs, so I flop 2 overs and a flush draw. Definitely not afraid to get this in, and with the stack sizes in play, it seems like that's reasonably likely if he connects, or if he has really any kind of a pair in his hand. I see bet $25. He makes it 100 pretty quickly, and I just jam. I don't think there's any reason to wait here. He's certainly willing to get the money in, but I have enough equity against pretty much his whole range. He snaps it off. We're all in for about $230 each. The turn bricks out, the river bricks out, and 9-6 offsuit is good. I guess I'm not running that good. So very quickly, buy in for this game for 300. Snap rebuy for another 300, and I'm gonna get back on the horse, try to turn the session around. It's not much later. There's an under the gun straddle. I'm under the gun +1 with ace 10 of hearts, and I bump it up to 15. I get 2 calls, and a player in late position bumps it up to 30, which is pretty weird sizing. I definitely don't think he is necessarily nutted here. He doesn't really have to have jacks plus. He doesn't have to even have ace king, ace queen. This is a sort of inexperienced player, and he's shown a willingness to make big bets with hands that he deems are good, but not necessarily amazing. So it's kind of hard to put him on a range here, but I'm definitely not going away for this price. The situation is sort of compounded when the small blind calls all in for $9. Now, I could raise here and try to isolate, but I just decided my hand's going to play pretty well multi-way, and I'm going to play it more for the flush and kind of bigger hand strength value than trying to just hit a pair and hold on. So I make the call, 2 players call behind me, so we're going 5 ways to a flop with 1 player all in for $9. We have a little bit of a snafu trying to figure out what the main pot and the side pot is, but ultimately we get going and see a flop of jack 5-4 with 2 hearts. I'm first to act, and I have $277 in my stack. I just select to jam all in. I think this is a spot where I'm never going anywhere, and so by sizing really big, I can sometimes get hands that are stronger than mine to fold, that to a normal sizing might just jam over the top or just call. And ultimately, I don't think most flush draws are even going away, so I might cooler somebody in that sense. Folds around to, I think, late position, but I'm not positive. I know that I ended up getting it in against just one other player, and they showed the king 6 of hearts. So I'm in fantastic shape, but small blind is calling for no heart, no heart. So hard to know what he has, but
Athletic abilities.
Oh my.
Oh.
No heart. No heart. No heart.
All right, Jesus.
Wow.
He's a good No heart. No heart. Hold on.
ultimately there's a really big side pot, over $500, and a main pot of under 50. So we're in really good shape in the side pot, and I'm pretty happy about it. The turn and the river both end up bricking out, and the small blind did not have the hand I expected. Grant you, he only had $9, but at the same time, not what I expected.
My first thing in 2 days.
I don't even see it.
Yeah, I only see the new one that's coming up.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
I can't hear what. Please be.
That's the winning
And
hand.
My first victory in 2 days.
That's for the main.
Oh
piggy
my
bank.
goodness.
My first victory in 2
This
days.
is-
I'm sitting in Jeff's seat. I pull a honorary Jeff.
Listen.
They got it. I don't even have
You had $9. You had $9. I thought you won it all.
No,
Hell no,
$9,
you had
man.
$9.
Come on, man.
Nice hand, sir, and I'm going to take down the side pot, but, you know, that main pot is where it's at, of course. In this hand, there are 3 limps. I make it $20 with ace king of spades in the cutoff. The big blind and all 3 limpers call, so we're going 5 ways to a flop. Flop is king, queen, queen. So definitely mixed emotions on this board. Queen X is certainly in people's ranges, but I do rate to be good a decent amount of the time. The big blind checks, and early position now leads for $50. Not in love with the situation, but this is the kind of inexperienced player who could maybe overvalue a king in this spot, and just expect it to be good more often than it is against the field. So I'm definitely not planning on going away. He gets called by middle position though, and this is a more experienced player, somebody who I would expect to hold on with a king for a bet, but could also have a queen a pretty solid amount of the time. I begrudgingly call, and it folds around. We go 3 ways to a turn now, which is an ace. Pretty confusing card. We get a little more clarity though when early position jams for 140, and middle position does not hesitate and calls. When middle position just calls, it's very clear he doesn't have just a king. It's a terrible spot for him if he has king jack or king 10. Ace is a card that could potentially connect with me, connect with the better, and ultimately I think he just always has a queen now. So I let go of it. I let go of ace king, and we do get to see the hands. Early position had ace 5. He ends up losing to queen 7 from middle position. It's also worth noting that middle position had about $200 to $300 behind, so even if I call the 140, I'm potentially facing another bet on the river, getting a weirdly good price, and not in a great spot. So I do think my fold on the turn was very justified. You could maybe make a case for folding flop against specifically middle positions call, but if it was just early positions lead, I'm definitely not folding flop or turn. In this hand, I'm on the button straddle, and I've got king 9 of spades. Middle position raises to $20, cutoff calls, and I choose to call as well. Flop comes queen 10-5 with 1 spade and 2 hearts, so I've got a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. Already thinking I might decide to make some moves on this board just because I've connected pretty hard, and I can potentially barrel off on a decent number of turn cards as well. Middle position, who's the original raiser, checks, and the cutoff now bets. He bets just 30 though, and I think this might be a sign of a somewhat weaker hand. So with that, I decided to bump it up to 100, and it folds back around to the cutoff. He seems to be in a tough spot, and ultimately takes his time, but does call. And so I'm still considering barreling off, but we're going to have to see what the board brings. I don't think he is stronger than king queen here, but he could be holding on with something like queen jack or queen 9. Aside from that, he'll definitely have some draws, some 10x, and I do expect some of those to be able to fold out on the turn. The turn, however, is the queen of diamonds, which I don't think it's a great card to barrel on, just because when he checks to me, I can't really represent a queen that easily. There aren't a lot of queen x hands I would raise on the flop, if any. And the ones that do are boats now, so I would definitely consider checking them back just to disguise the strength of my hand. I do potentially still have some outs, so I can catch up versus some of the other hands in his range, including the queen x. So I ultimately decide to just take my equity now and check behind. The river is an offsuit jack, and middle position, who's not in the hand any longer but was on the flop, is visibly pissed off. So it's unclear to me whether he has something like ace king and just would have spiked nuts, or maybe pocket jacks. But either way, he's sort of saying that he has a lot of the things that would have connected hard with this board, but that couldn't call the flop. The cutoff now checks, which is pretty remarkable after I check back the turn. I don't think he can really expect me to bet for him all that often, so I kind of tend to eliminate most of the queen x out of his range now, which means that after I've spiked this straight, my hand is actually good, like a pretty high percentage of the time. So I ultimately go for the jam. It's about $200, and he tanks for a very long time. Definitely not happy with the situation, so, pretty quickly after fading the snap call, I expect my hand is good. He does ultimately call, and my hand is good against pretty interestingly played jack 10. So definitely unfortunate for him that I hit that jack. He was pretty well ahead on the flop, and ultimately I just think that it was kind of lucky that the queen came on the turn first, because it was very hard for him to put me on a hand that he doesn't beat, and there's still a bunch of missed draws on that run out. So definitely nice to spike one there and build it back up pretty close back to even.
I'm just asking. I get an update on the fight, you know what I mean?
It's so hard to see showtime.
Oh my gosh.
Jumping Hank are worse than me.
Yeah, you're thinking of the doctor that.
Yeah, Jumping Hank killed Joe Biden.
And in the Ponca City Blackville area, 68 degrees today.
One black check.
Winds southerly at about 15 with gusts of 25 miles.
In this hand, I'm in the button straddle again, and I have queen jack offsuit. There are 4 limps, and I bump it up to 35, which I think is much better sizing in terms of what I should have been doing kind of earlier in a similar spot. However, I still end up getting 3 calls from the small blind, middle position, and the cutoff. So we're going 4 ways to a flop. The flop comes 6-4 deuce with 2 spades. I do have a spade in my hand, but nothing else really going on. A solid player leads in middle position for 45 bucks, and I don't really think he should be all that strong here. When it folds to me, I bump it up to 145. This is not a play I would really suggest all that often in, say, a casino game, just because with this hand you have so little equity, but at the same time I decided that I have some backdoors. My raise looks pretty strong versus the field, and he's going to fold a decent amount of stuff. However, the small blind ends up calling all in for 130 total, and it ends up folding back around. So definitely need some help. We decided to ultimately run it twice. On the first board, there's a jack and a 5, and on the second board, there's a 3 and a 4. He has king 10 offsuit. This is a spot where I sort of overestimated my fold equity, I think, because I had already made some plays that might have looked like moves. I definitely showed down some weak hands tonight, and ultimately this player was just sort of fed up and said king I is probably good here. Now, I don't really think his play is going to be that successful in the long run, because I don't do this a lot with just some random queen high hand. The types of hands that I'm more likely to do it with are things that have a ton of equity, so even my bluffs will be stuff like 7-8 with spades, other kinds of spade draws, open-ended, gut shots. Can I even have open-ended? Point being, I can have all of those bluffs that are way better and have a lot more equity. I can also have ace highs if I can have queen high. And on top of that, I've also got value hands. I have all my overpairs, I have sets, and I might have some 2-pair holdings as well. But at the end of the day, he kind of just put the soul read on me in that spot, so can't really fault him for going with his gut there. And ultimately he was right, and we're going to just chop it up. In this hand, there are 2 limps. I'm in middle position with ace queen offsuit, and I bump it up to $20. The button and both limpers end up calling, so we go 4 ways to a flop. Flop is king 7-4, 2 clubs. Checks to me, and I just decide to check behind. I kind of learned my lesson from the last hand that my image might be a little bit shot for the night. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of credit from the field. So I check it back, and we go 4 ways to a turn. Turn is an offsuit 4. It checks to the button, who now bets 45. Now, this is interesting because he shouldn't really have a king, I don't think. When it checks around to him on the flop, he is actually the last to act. He's acting after me as a pre-flop aggressor, so he can't expect anyone else to be putting a lot of money in later on, and the board is reasonably wet. So I do think most people are betting a king here, and when I can remove that from his range, the only kinds of value hands I think he has now are 4x. So when he bets 45 and it folds around to me, I actually put him more on just weird sorts of draws. He could have something like pocket 8s, pocket 9s, but again, I think those might just bet the flop. So I make the call. The river bricks out. It's a 9 of hearts. I check. He checks behind, and I win against ace 3 of clubs. End up playing kind of loosey-goosey this session, play kind of weird, kind of wild, and just ultimately was basically the action. But I did battle back, didn't quite book a win, but all in all, not too bad of a result.
Save it, I'm folding. I'll save it for later time.
Alright, you can tell me what you had.
I had ace 10. So unless a 10 comes out, I think I'm dead. I think I'm dead no matter what. I think somebody got a set. He got a set. Holy shit. What? Oh my.
You would have won, man. You just lost your moment.
If he doesn't call,
You see those chips?
if he doesn't
They would have
call,
gone here. They would have come there like that.
He was afraid to go against both of you. Once you call, if you don't call, he calls.
Terminal in for 6, out for 510, minus 90.
Wind southerly at about 15 with gusts of 25 miles an hour. Barometric pressure 30.00 and is rising. And no precipitation. We're about a half inch behind, correction, half inch ahead for the year, and 1 53/100ths behind for the year so far. We'll be looking for a little bit of a change tomorrow, and of course the possibility of some scattered showers. Today, of course, there's nothing showing up on